Good to get going here?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we will get started then. So, thank you for having me at your school this morning. And where are you guys located?
We're located in Florence, Wisconsin.
Florence, Wisconsin. Okay, all right. Well, my name is Dane Elmquist, and I'm here located at the University of Minnesota Monarch Lab. Can anybody guess what we study here in the Monarch Lab? Shout it out. I can't really call on you guys.
Butterflies.
Yeah, you got it. Exactly. Yep, we study the monarch butterfly. We also do a lot of other things too, besides just research. We do a lot of community outreach and education, which is kind of what I'm here doing with you all right now. And we also do a lot of conservation work. As you might know, the monarch butterfly population is decreasing. And a lot of that is due to habitat loss and the monarch losing things that it is necessary for its life. And so we do a lot of conservation work, trying to bring back some of that habitat and educate people on what's needed to keep this, this really, really interesting and unique organism around. So my teacher, your teacher tells me that you've been studying some of the monarch butterfly life cycle. Is that true?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So I'll give you a little outline of what we're going to do today. So I figure that we'll go through, we'll talk a little bit about the monarch butterfly life cycle. I'll talk to you guys, and you can talk back to me. I'm really interested in hearing what you all know about monarchs, because it's always fun to talk to each other and communicate and learn from one another. Then after that, I'm thinking I kind of prepared a virtual lab tour for you guys, so you can kind of see what we do in the Monarch Lab. You can see our greenhouse where we grow a lot of the plants that we use for research. And you can see a couple of the native plant gardens that we maintain on the university campus. So it'll kind of be like a fun little tour. And then finally, if we have time, I do have some live organisms like monarch caterpillars and adult butterflies, along with a microscope. So I can screen share with you guys, and we can take that microscope and we can look at some of the parts of the live organisms that we're going to discuss here in a few minutes. Does that sound good? Does that sound fun to everybody? I hope we have enough time to get through all that.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. So we're going to jump into a quick presentation about the life cycle of the butterfly. And so I'm going to screen share some pictures with you guys so we can follow along, okay? All right, 1 second here. Let me get this set up. Okay, so can everyone see amazing monarch butterflies on your screen?
Yeah.
All right, so we will get started. So now that you guys know a little bit about monarch butterflies, I want to see how well you can identify a monarch. So out of these three butterflies, can you tell me which one is a monarch? So I can't really call on you. So if you think you know the answer, just shout it out.
Second.
So the top right one or the bottom middle one?
Right. Bottom right.
All right, I'm hearing a couple different answers, but most of you are saying the top right, I believe. You are correct. So those other two butterflies are good examples of monarch mimics. Now, can anybody tell me why a butterfly might want to mimic a monarch? Go ahead and shout it out.
So, maybe they can learn more about them instead of the monarchs.
Yeah, so I think I kind of heard the correct answer there. They want to look like the monarchs because the monarchs are poisonous. So it's advantageous for other butterflies to look like monarchs because they can confuse predators that way. Good job. So you guys did a good job at IDing that butterfly. All right, so as you guys have probably learned in your class, the monarch has 4 life stages. We have the egg stage, caterpillar or larva. Then we have the chrysalis stage, also called pupa. And after the pupal stage, out comes the adult butterfly. So it all begins with an egg. How long do you guys think the monarch butterfly stays as an egg? I'll leave it for your teacher. Would you guys be okay with calling on a student for me?
Yeah, Brady.
About 10 days.
10 days. Okay, that's a little long. Does anyone have another guess?
Logan M.
5 to 10 days.
Okay, 5 to 10 days. Yeah, the range. So you're getting a little closer with the 5 days.
Aiden.
No, 6 or 8 days.
Closer to 5. Dave.
All right. So yeah, the answer is about 3 to 5 days. So it stays as that egg stage for a decent amount of time. And monarch caterpillar development is all dependent on temperature. So that's why we see a range in between time. If it's really, really cold out, it's going to take the monarch caterpillar a little longer to develop. So the egg might hatch closer to that 5-day mark. However, if it's really hot out, that egg might hatch closer to that 3-day mark because the increased temperature causes a quicker development. All right, so after that, caterpillar hatches out of its egg. It's now in the larval stage. Can anybody tell me how long they think the caterpillar remains in the larval stage?
Matthew.
18 days.
18 days.
18 days? All right, that's a good guess. That's a good guess. Does anyone have another guess?
Camden.
At least 10 days.
Okay, well, nice. So both of you got pretty close, both on the near end and the far end. So a larva typically stays in that stage for about 10 to 14 days. Again, it's all dependent on the temperature. So after about 14 days, the larva is going to pupate, turn into a chrysalis, and enter the pupal stage. Alrighty, how long do you think the caterpillar will remain a pupa?
Robin.
7 to 8 days.
7.
All right, 7 to 8 days. Does anyone have another guess?
Trent.
7 to 10 days.
Okay, yep, getting a little longer. So the actual answer is about 10 to 14 days again. It's another 2 weeks that monarch butterfly stays in the pupal stage. All right, so after 10 to 14 days, we all know what happens next. The adult butterfly closes. And how long will the adult butterfly typically live for?
Logan K.
2 weeks.
2 weeks, all right, that's a good guess. Anybody have another guess?
Jonathan.
A year.
A year. All right, well, another very good guess. So you guys also got it both on the low end and the high end. So a typical adult butterfly lives up to 1 month, but it can also live up to 9 months. So that's a pretty big range of time. Why do you think that some butterflies can live up to 9 months?
Crystal.
Because they look like they're poison.
All right, I didn't quite catch that answer.
They look like they're poisonous.
Okay, yep, so that all the butterflies, all monarch butterflies are going to be poisonous, no matter how long they live for. What does a monarch do every year? What is one thing that the monarch does every year?
Brady.
Fly south.
Flies south, exactly. So the monarch migrates. So those monarchs that live up to 9 months are actually the migrating generation. So the monarchs that live only 1 to 2 months, They're the monarchs that we see up in Minnesota and Wisconsin in June and July. They're there, they're breeding, laying eggs on milkweed plants. But when the temperature shifts, it starts to get a little colder. The monarchs that are born near the end of August or the beginning of September are that migratory generation. So that's the monarch generation that's going to live up to 9 months. So they need that extra time to make it down to Mexico and then migrate back north the following spring. All right. So the entire monarch life cycle begins with an egg. And this egg is barely bigger than the size of a pinhead. So as you can see in this picture, this is a really, really close-up version of a monarch egg. It all begins when the monarch butterfly female lays an egg on a milkweed plant. You see in this picture how her abdomen, or that body structure you see bending beneath the wings, it's bending there, and she's laying an egg on the bottom of a milkweed plant. So as we just talked about, the egg stays as an egg for about 3 to 5 days. And then the first instar caterpillar hatches. So if you see that picture in the top left corner, can anyone see a little dot next to that fingernail? That is a monarch egg next to an adult's hand. So that is an extremely, extremely small egg. I apologize if you hear some of that background noise. The building I'm in might be having a fire alarm for a few minutes here, so I apologize for that excess noise. Can you still hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, we'll keep going. So after about 3 to 5 days, that egg is going to hatch into a first instar caterpillar. So if you look way on the right corner, you're going to see a small little caterpillar. Can everyone see the smallest caterpillar on that screen? All right, that is a first instar caterpillar. And you can see them in this picture too, next to that adult fingernail. Look how small they are. They're less than a centimeter long. They are really small. So when you're out there looking in milkweed and looking for caterpillars, it's super important to use very careful observation skills and have really good attention to detail because they're extremely small and easy to miss. So as the monarch caterpillar progresses through its life, you'll start to see some changes. So a monarch caterpillar, all it does is really eat, eat, eat. Can someone tell me, remind me what plant monarchs need to eat?
Leaves. Milkweed plants.
Milkweed, yep, so they eat the leaves of the milkweed plant. It's the only plant monarch caterpillars can develop on. So as they're eating, they're growing very large. So they need to shed their skin. Monarch caterpillars shed their skin 5 times in their life, and they go through 5 instars. That's the period between when a caterpillar sheds its skin. So in this picture, we're looking at a second instar. So that first instar, these caterpillars, they've just shed their skin to become a second instar. You can kind of start to notice some differences. So on the first instar caterpillar, there wasn't a lot of color. And you didn't see these tentacles on the front and back of the monarch caterpillar. Now it's important to know that these are not called antennae. Rather, they're called tentacles on the caterpillar. Once the caterpillar goes through metamorphosis and becomes an adult, that's when the adult has antennae. Until then, the monarch caterpillars have tentacles. So a second instar, you start to see the tentacles appear in the front and back. As the caterpillar continues to eat and shed its skin, it turns into a third instar. So you can see those tentacles get a little longer and their coloration starts to become a little more noticeable. It gets vivid. In this picture, you can actually see the old skin of the caterpillar. Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Oftentimes, this is a kind of cool fact, oftentimes after the caterpillar sheds its skin, it'll go right back around and it will eat its own skin. That skin is actually really nutritious, full of good protein and other compounds that will help that caterpillar develop.
May I ask a question?
So, as the caterpillar continues to eat, it goes through another instar. This fourth instar, basically the caterpillar is getting larger, tentacles are getting longer, and it continues eating, and it gets to this big fifth instar stage. So if you look at this picture, you can really tell the difference from this small egg in the top left corner of your screen to that big fifth instar caterpillar that you see front and center. So just to kind of put this in perspective for you, when the monarch grows from the size of its egg to the fifth instar, that's the equivalent of a human baby growing to the size of an elephant in just 2 weeks. Isn't that pretty amazing?
Yes.
Can you imagine how much you would have to eat to grow from the size of a baby to an elephant in just 2 weeks? Pretty amazing. So that's why all the caterpillars do during their life is just munch on that milkweed, and they grow extremely fast.
Hey Dane, one of the kids has a question.
When it first comes out of its egg, what's its very first food to eat? Its egg?
Yes, that's a good question and exactly the right answer. So similar to when the monarch caterpillars will eat their skin, as soon as they hatch, the first thing that first instar caterpillar does is eat its own eggshell. Again, because that eggshell is full of protein and other good compounds that'll help that small caterpillar get off to a really rapid start in its development. Good question. All right, so we've gone through the egg stage and the caterpillar stage. Can someone tell me what's next? What's the next stage in the monarch life cycle?
Jonathan? The chrysalis.
Exactly, the chrysalis or the pupal stage. So, when the fifth instar is ready to progress to its pupal stage, it's going to crawl off its plant. Oops, sorry guys, my slides are getting out of control here. All right, so ignore those. So, sorry, we'll go backtrack a little. When the fifth instar finishes eating and it's time to turn into a chrysalis, it's going to crawl off its milkweed plant. It doesn't pupate on the milkweed plant because milkweed is a really, really active community. That milkweed plant supports many more invertebrates than just monarch caterpillars. You've got milkweed beetles, stink bugs, assassin bugs, ants and spiders. They all use that milkweed community. So when the monarch is ready to pupate, it leaves that milkweed plant to go find a safer, more secluded spot to turn into a chrysalis. Oftentimes it can crawl over 1 meter away from its plant. That's pretty far if you're a small caterpillar compared to humans. When it finds a safe place to pupate, the monarch will attach a silk pad. Can everyone see that silk pad in the screen there?
Yeah.
All right. And what does this monarch look like? What would this stage be called right before it pupates? Kind of reminds me of a letter. Go ahead and shout it out.
Backwards J.
Did I hear a J?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, exactly. So this is the J stage. Right before the monarch is about to pupate, it goes, lays its silk pad down, then hangs upside down in a J. So you can see here's the larva in the J stage. Once it enters the J stage and right before it pupates, it kind of straightens out a little more. You saw in this picture it's really curved up. Here the caterpillar is straight. That's when you can tell it's about to turn into a chrysalis. Here we see the caterpillar shedding its skin. And in this part, we see the actual chrysalis kind of bending and moving around. So what that caterpillar is trying to do at this stage is shake off its skin. See in this picture, there's no skin. Here, there's the skin. So when this caterpillar is trying to shake off its skin as it's turning into a chrysalis, Here at the Monarch Lab, we have a very technical term for that, and we call it the pupa dance. So that pupa is just sitting there dancing around, thrashing, having a lot of movement, trying to shake off that extra skin. After it shakes off that skin, and only after about 5 minutes, this J stage advances all the way to turning into a new monarch pupa. All right, and does anybody remember how long this monarch is going to stay as a pupa?
Ava?
All right, I couldn't quite hear you.
10 to 14 days.
Yeah, 10 to 14 days, exactly. You guys got it. So, after about 10 to 14 days, you're going to see this monarch chrysalis. It's gonna get all this color in it. So that's when you see that transparent chrysalis, you can see the wings form, gets that orange and black color. That's when you know the caterpillar, the monarch adult butterfly is about to eclose. We use that term eclose to describe the event of when a butterfly emerges from its pupa. Can everyone say that with me? Eclose?
Eclose.
All right, exactly. So when a monarch butterfly is about to eclose after 10 to 14 days, it comes out head first.
Hey, Dane?
Yeah.
Logan has a question.
Okay, definitely. Logan, what's your question?
Do you have a video when that's going out of the pupa?
You know, I don't have a video in my slideshow. I just have these pictures here. But if you go onto YouTube after this presentation, you can look up a lot of really, really cool videos of monarchs eclosing from their chrysalis and of monarchs turning into a pupa. So I'm sorry I didn't include any videos in this presentation today. But after we get done with this presentation, I'm sure if you ask your teacher, she can show you a couple quick videos of the monarchs eclosing from their chrysalis. It's really cool. If you guys ever get the chance to see it in person, that's even better. All right, so we'll hop back into this. Okay, so after a monarch ecloses, it's going to sit there and hang for a while. And so in this picture that we're looking at right here, the final picture of this, this show here, does this look like a regular adult butterfly? Kind of, sort of, not really. Its wings are really small, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think that monarch has to do to increase the size of its wings?
Here?
You have to stretch them and try getting all that slime off.
Yeah, exactly. So when the monarch is in its chrysalis, it's in essentially a medium that has a lot of different nutrients in it for it to grow and develop. When it's in that chrysalis, it has no place for its waste products to go. So when the monarch ecloses from its chrysalis, those waste products are still there, and they'll fall out of the chrysalis. But that leaves the monarch butterfly with wet, damp wings. So in order for the monarch butterfly to dry out its wings and also increase their size, it sits there and it hangs from its chrysalis for a while. And it takes that abdomen, and that abdomen is filled with essentially the monarch's blood, the equivalent to what blood would be for humans. And its abdomen pumps that blood into the monarch wings. So it sits there, and while it's drying out, it also pumps its wings up. This whole process, from when a monarch ecloses, only takes about 5 minutes. But they often will sit there and hang for about 5 hours, depending on how safe their environment is. And they hang there just so they can dry out. So this is a picture of 2 adult butterflies. Now there is some difference. Can someone tell me what the difference between these 2 butterflies are?
One's darker and the other's lighter.
Yep, okay, that's definitely true. So I'll give you a hint. One of these butterflies is male and the other butterfly is female. Can you tell me which one is male?
Jonathan,
The white one.
left or right?
The right one.
The right one. How do you know?
Robin,
Because the female butterfly's lines on the wings are thicker than the male.
Okay, I think I kind of heard you. You said that the female has thicker lines than the male?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, yep. So that's very true too. So if you look at the male, on those thin lines, you're also going to see 2 dots on the back hind wings. Does everyone see those 2 dots?
Yeah.
Okay, so that is another signifier that this is a male butterfly. It's going to have those thinner veins and 2 dots on the back hind wings. So when you're out in the field and if you see a monarch butterfly, now you know how to tell if it's a male or a female. And when you tell if it's a male or a female, you're going to be able to pick up on some of the unique behaviors that males or females exhibit. So if you see a male butterfly in the wild, oftentimes you're going to see the male butterflies flying higher than female butterflies. They often fly above the milkweed and nectar plant patches because they are searching for a mate. So they fly high above so they can get a good view of what's out there and any dangers that might be present. If you see a female butterfly, monarch butterfly in the wild, she's oftentimes going to be flying lower, maybe close to the ground or definitely around the tops or even mid-level of all the milkweed plants, because what she's doing is she's looking for suitable spots to lay her eggs. All right, so as we touched on a little bit, we're going to just discuss a little bit about the monarch migration. So we touched on earlier that those monarchs live longer in the winter because they fly down to Mexico, where they overwinter because they can't take the harsh cold temperatures that we experience here in Minnesota and Wisconsin. You guys know that our winters last about 6 to 7 months. It's pretty cold, even for us. So those monarchs, they definitely don't want to be up here. So they migrate down to Mexico. And this picture that you're looking at is a real picture taken by the director of the Monarch Lab, Karen Oberhauser, when she was down in Mexico. So these are all real butterflies flying around her. When you get down to Mexico, they congregate in a very small mountainous region in the middle of Mexico, a little bit to the west of Mexico City. High in the mountains, it's where you'll see all these butterflies. And it gets pretty cold up there. It remains a little, sometimes it can even dip below freezing. So what these butterflies do is they will roost. You'll see very thick clumps of butterflies in these trees on the side of the mountains. So sometimes there can be thousands of butterflies covering one tree. And they use this to control their temperature and to stay warm so that they can survive this wintering period. When spring comes, monarch butterflies will then leave Mexico and kind of go up to that northern Mexico, southern Texas region, where they'll reproduce, and then those migrating monarchs will then die. But those eggs that they laid will become caterpillars, will become pupa, and will eventually become adults. And that generation will continue moving north, following the availability of milkweed throughout the United States, and they'll repopulate the regions in the Northeast and Midwest by summer. So I'm guessing you guys, has anybody seen a monarch this year yet in the wild?
No.
Yeah, neither have I. So that's because the monarchs typically will arrive to Minnesota, Wisconsin region by about the end of May, early June. So we're pretty close to the time period when we might start seeing some of those monarchs arrive into our region. So keep an eye out because they're coming. Okay, so that's the end of our presentation on the monarch life cycle. So right now, I would like to give you guys a little virtual tour of what we do in the monarch lab. Does that sound like a good plan?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, actually, this is a really good time. Let's take some questions.
Ava?
How many kinds of butterflies are there?
I'm sorry, I couldn't really hear that one.
She asked, how many kinds of butterflies are there?
Oh, wow. How many kinds of butterflies are there? That's a really great question that I actually do not know the exact answer to. So butterflies and moths fall into a category called Lepidoptera. So Lepidoptera includes all butterflies and moths. So I can tell you exactly how many species. Well, first of all, I'll say that there's many thousand more moths in the Lepidoptera than there are butterflies. So moths greatly outnumber butterflies. I can tell you in Minnesota, we have 473 different species of butterflies that are native to Minnesota, compared with about over 2,000 species of moths.
What?
So you can see that there's quite a difference there. And I'm not sure how many native species that you guys have in Wisconsin, but I'm guessing because our regions are somewhat similar environments that you'll have around the same number that we see here in Minnesota. And many of them will be the same. So for answering your question, I do not know the exact number of butterfly species that exist, and I'm sure that there are many more that we haven't discovered yet as well. So that's why we need future scientists like yourself out there making these important discoveries. Someone else have a question?
Matthew?
How many butterflies do you have in the
How many butterflies do we have in the lab?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a really good question. So we have, I believe, about 4 different species of butterflies in the lab right now. We have monarch butterflies. We have cabbage white butterflies, which are a small white butterfly that you guys will actually get to see here. We have buckeye butterflies and swallowtail butterflies. So, and sometimes we have more. Sometimes there'll be painted lady butterflies and pipevine swallowtail butterflies, but we just don't currently have them in the lab right now.
We have caterpillars that turn into chrysalises of painted ladies.
All right, I didn't quite hear the end of that question. So I heard caterpillars turn into chrysalises.
In our classrooms right now, we have the painted lady butterflies, and they're in the chrysalis right now.
Oh, excellent. Oh, awesome. So that's great. You guys have been able to observe the life cycle of the painted lady then?
Yeah.
So it's pretty similar to the monarch, right? It goes through those 4 life stages, turns into a chrysalis, then emerges as an adult butterfly, right? So does the chrysalis of the painted lady butterfly look different than the monarch? Yeah, I think they look a lot different, don't they? Can someone describe to me what the chrysalis of a painted lady looks like?
Rita?
It's black.
Okay, yeah, definitely. It's darker. It's kind of got that. It's got some more spiny edges to it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Does someone else have any question?
Robin?
So what she asked, Dean, was do you have female and male monarchs in your lab right now?
Yes, we do. Yep. So actually, in a video that you guys will see later, you'll actually get to see a mating cage that we have set up with male and female monarchs. So we need the males and the females because in the lab, we do a lot of experiments. So it's important that we have a lot of monarch butterflies all the time. So we often have these mating cages set up so that the male and the female, they'll mate and then they can reproduce, and they lay a bunch of eggs on a milkweed plant that we then take all those eggs and we'll rear those caterpillars to adulthood. So that's a really good question. It's really important to have males and female stock in the lab. Does anybody else have a question? I can answer anything you want.
Garrett?
Butterflies sleep.
Do butterflies sleep? Was that the right question?
Yes, Dean.
Yeah, okay, yep. So butterflies, yeah, that's a really good question. Butterflies do, so they kind of sleep. So butterflies, they have compound eyes. They don't have eyelids like you and I. So they're never able to truly shut their eyes. However, they do roost at night. And so when they roost, that's essentially the same action as sleeping. They're not able to close their eyes, but they're not moving. Their metabolism kind of slows down, and they remain pretty sedentary, or they remain very still. So the roosting action that you see when a bunch of butterflies will combine in a tree like we saw when they're down in Mexico, that's kind of the equivalent as a butterfly's sleep. It's quite interesting too. Butterflies' muscles actually won't work if it's less than 55 degrees outside. And so they'll kind of go into a state of temporary hibernation almost because they're cold-blooded. So that's kind of another close equivalent to maybe a butterfly sleeping. Other questions?
Nope.
Nope, I think we're good. Thank you, Dean.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so now we'll talk a little bit about the Monarch Lab. So in this first picture that you see here, you can see a little caterpillar in there, right?
Yeah.
He's sticking to the top of the screen right next to my finger. So we keep all our caterpillars in deli tubs. So we keep them individual in all these individual tubs because when you have a lot of caterpillars together, it's really easy for them to spread disease. So we have a bunch of caterpillars in these little Tupperware deli tubs that you guys have all probably seen at the grocery store. So we keep a caterpillar inside a deli tub with a lot of different milkweed species, depending on what we want them to eat. They usually live their whole life inside this tub until they turn into a chrysalis. So here you can see the chrysalis that we have here in the lab. And I'll actually give you a little info on this picture right here. One of the students in the Monarch Lab, one of the graduate students, his PhD project actually involves parasitoid wasps. So monarchs have a lot of different predators, natural predators, and one of them are parasitoid wasps. So these really, really small wasps, I don't know if you guys can see it, but if you look to the right of that chrysalis, and you see a little black dot on the top of the deli container. Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
That's a wasp. That's a parasitoid wasp that you're looking at. You can see he's kind of advancing towards that chrysalis. And so what these parasitoid wasps do is they land on the chrysalis and they lay their eggs inside that pupa. So the eggs are inside that pupa and they hatch. And they start eating the pupa from the inside out. So they use that pupa as a source of nutrients to develop. And after when it's time to emerge from the pupa, they'll bore a hole from the inside of the pupa, and they'll bore a hole to the outside. So when it's time for these wasps to come out, sometimes hundreds of them can come out of these chrysalis. So these wasps use this monarch as a host to complete their own life cycle. pretty interesting research going on. So that's why we have to have a lot of caterpillars and monarchs around, because at least for this graduate student's experiment, most of these pupa and monarchs are going to die or be parasitized by these wasps. So, as you might have imagined, what happens to all these caterpillars as they grow and develop and then turn into butterflies? So sometimes at the Monarch Lab, we can have hundreds of adult butterflies. And that's a lot to take care of, and you can't really have these butterflies flying around in a cage, because when they fly around in cages, they bang their wings on the cages all the time, and it's not a very safe environment for them to live in a long-term setting. And we like to keep the butterflies around for, months at a time if possible. 2 to 6 weeks usually is what we aim for. So we have a cold incubator. Remember, we talked about monarchs are cold-blooded so that they can regulate they can't fly when it's below 55 degrees. They need to roost in Mexico to stay warm. That's all because they're cold-blooded. So we can take advantage of that, and we can keep them in a cold incubator. So we keep these monarchs in what we call sleeping bags. They're really just little envelopes. So we keep the monarchs inside these envelopes in this cold incubator so we control their body temperature. This helps them stay alive longer, have less wear and tear on their wings, and it makes it so we only have to feed them 1 time a week instead of every day. So you guys can see there's a lot of interesting things that go on when you use monarchs or other invertebrate organisms for research. Here's another picture of an incubator that we use, and in this incubator, this has caterpillars in it. So why would we want to vary the temperature of a caterpillar? What does temperature have to do with the caterpillar's development?
Logan?
Making it develop faster and slower?
Yeah, exactly. So by controlling the temperature, we can control how fast these caterpillars will develop. So caterpillars in this incubator is at a higher temperature than room temperature. So these caterpillars are growing faster. And you can see we have them separated onto 2 different shelves. That's because we're using 2 different types of milkweed plants, which you guys will see in a video in 1 second. We're using 2 different types of milkweed plants to rear these caterpillars on. So we can compare the differences in what these caterpillars eat and how they develop based off their host plant. This is another picture of the cold incubator where you saw some of those monarchs. Here's just another shot of those deli tubs that we have, and as you can see, it's pretty busy. So all these deli tubs that you're looking at, each of those tubs is an individual experiment. So each of those tubs, it has a monarch caterpillar in it of some kind that's undergoing some sort of experiment, most likely with the parasitoid wasps. So part of our job in the lab is to keep everything very, very clean. So monarchs that we catch from the wild can be infected with a very, very deadly parasite, a protozoan parasite called Ophiocystis electrospira. You guys probably didn't understand that name. Most people don't. So that's why we just call it OE. OE is a very damaging parasite to monarch butterflies. So when we catch butterflies in the wild, it's important that we check them for this OE parasite. Otherwise, this OE parasite will get into the lab and it really causes a lot of problems. So when you're looking at this picture, you see this kind of small glass area to the right, looks like a sliding glass door. That's called a fume hood. So when we turn that on, it takes the air from that area and sucks it out of the lab. So it provides a sterile environment for us to test these butterflies for these spores. In order to test the butterflies for OE, it's kind of funny. So OE propagates or lives on the butterfly scales. So when we test for OE, we take an adult butterfly caught from the wild, take it into this fume hood or this chamber, and we'll take a piece of tape and we'll stick the tape to the abdomen of the butterfly and remove a scale sample. Then we take that scale sample and we attach it to a microscope slide. We then take that slide to the microscope, which you can see on your left, and we examine that slide and look at those scales for any signs of OE. If we don't see any OE and the wild butterfly is deemed OE free, we take the butterfly out of that fume hood, put it back into one of its sleeping bags, and it returns to the cold incubator. There's another just shot of that experimental setup zone right there. All right, and now we're gonna, I'm sorry, got a little ahead of myself there. I'm gonna show you a short video I made yesterday of our greenhouse. We have a greenhouse on campus that we use to grow plants to support all the organisms that we're growing in the lab. So I'm gonna sit back and play this video for you guys, and it'll give you a little more of a shot into what we do in the greenhouse, what plants we grow, and then you'll get to see some of those mating cages that we talked about that have the female and male butterflies in them. So sit back and enjoy.
As you can see, what we're growing here is a lot of milkweed. Milkweed is the only plant that monarch caterpillars can develop on. So here we have two different species of milkweed. This is tropical milkweed, or Asclepias curasavica. And over here, we have swamp milkweed, or Asclepias incarnata. As we move down the bench, we see some plants that don't really look like milkweed. This is because one of the graduate students in the Monarch Lab also works with other butterflies, or Lepidoptera. Some of these butterflies might include pipevine swallowtails. Here's their host plant. Buckeye, who use plantain, and some other swallowtail species, which use parsley as one of their many host plants. In the greenhouse, there's also live stocks of butterflies. Here we see a mating cage with many cabbage white butterflies inside of it. They're kept in this mating cage so that they mate, eventually reproduce, and lay eggs on that cabbage plant. The eggs are very small, so you probably won't be able to see them on the plant. They're there. I can count about 15 on this one leaf in front of me. As we go to the other side of the bench, you can see a mating cage filled with monarch butterflies. And inside that mating cage is a milkweed plant for the monarchs to lay their eggs on once they mate. We move back down, we have another bench here filled with cabbage. Cabbage and other species of Brassica, the genus of cabbage, act as host plants for the cabbage white butterflies. So we have to grow a lot of cabbage because the cabbage white butterflies often can multiply very quickly and therefore consume a lot of cabbage. Here you see a bunch of different cages. Inside these cages are different host plants. If you look inside here, you can see milkweed, Asclepias curasavica. And if you look in the top right corner, you can see a few monarch caterpillars munching on some pretty bare stalks. Here's another host plant. This is the plantain we talked about. And as you can see, there's signs of caterpillar herbivory on the plants. See the holes in the leaves there? It means the caterpillars have been busy munching away. Here is another milkweed host plant. It's got many caterpillars. If you look in the middle, kind of in the background, you can see a few caterpillars on top of the plant as well. Finally, we have our cabbage plants, which, as you can see, lots of signs of herbivory showing that the cabbage white caterpillars have been munching away. The Monarch Lab has...
All right, so there you got a little tour of our greenhouse. You can see all of the different plants that we grow. Because a lot of them, most of them are used for research, using the different types of butterflies that we might have in the lab at the time. Some of them, however, go out into our native plant gardens. So the Monarch Lab at the U of M, one of the things that we do is strongly promote the planting of native plants in schoolyard gardens, in large areas of land that require conservation use. It's really important to plant native plants. Can you guys still hear me? Am I still there? Okay, cool. Just checking. All right, so now I'm going to give you a virtual tour of the butterfly gardens that we have on the U of M campus. So I'll be playing a couple other videos for you here. So here we go.
Two native plant gardens on the University of Minnesota campus. As you can see, many plants in this garden are quite small because they're just starting out. Over here you can see we've got a few of the milkweed species that we just discussed, as well as some other classic native prairie plants like Joe Pyeweed and more prairie plants over here. We call these gardens living laboratories. As you might have noticed, you see some red flags. Those are actually places where students are conducting experiments, mostly on bees and bee nesting habits. Here is the second native plant garden that the University of Minnesota Monarch Lab maintains. As you can see, there's a lot more of those red flags and even some other markers on these stems here that indicate that this is a living laboratory being used for research. One of the great things about these gardens is that they are completely open to the public and any University of Minnesota student. People come out here, eat lunch, take a break, and in the meantime, they get to enjoy all the biodiversity and beautiful plants that we see in this native garden that you don't really get to see in a lawn or something that has a lot of invasive species or non-natives. It just doesn't support that kind of habitat and those type of organisms. It looks like there are quite a few experiments going on in this garden right now.
All right, so you guys just got a good view of a lot of the habitat that we maintain on the U of M campus. So one of the things we discussed was the importance of butterfly habitat. Let me see if I can, sorry, get my screen back here. We talked a lot about the importance of habitat, especially native plants. As you heard me kind of mention there, that The native plants support a lot of biodiversity and a ton of different insects and organisms that you just don't see in lawns, because lawns essentially don't provide any benefit for organisms besides us, if we like the pretty lawn look that most people kind of go for. So that's why it's important to, if you do have a lawn, it is important to include some sort of native plants if possible, just to support those insects, those native insects and other native, sometimes mammals use them, native birds. It's very important because that habitat was here before us, and once we come, we do a lot of development as humans. So it's important to, when we can, restore some of that critical habitat for monarch butterflies and other insects and organisms. So, have you guys enjoyed your little tour today? Is that fun? Hope you had a good time. Do you have any questions about the Monarch Lab?
Abby?
How many eggs do butterflies have?
Oh, really good question. Really good question. So, a female monarch butterfly can lay up to 500, can lay more than 500 eggs in her lifetime if she gets the opportunity. So monarch butterflies can lay a lot of eggs. Typically, they will just lay one egg per milkweed plant. But in the lab, we've often seen them lay upwards of 50 to 75 eggs on one plant, just because they don't really have that other option to go seek out plants. Do you guys think all those 500 eggs, do they all make it? Do they all hatch? Yeah, that's correct. Nope, they all do not hatch, because there's, as we talked about, there's a lot of different natural predators that predate monarchs. And as we kind of discussed earlier too, that milkweed habitat, there's a lot of different organisms there. So laying an egg on milkweed, while it's the only place a monarch can lay its egg, is oftentimes can be fatal because of all the different organisms that live on the milkweed plant. Sadly, about 97% of the eggs laid by female monarchs don't make it. So monarchs have a very high mortality rate, which is one of the reasons why the female is able to lay so many eggs. It's an investment in the species. Do you have any other questions? You guys have come up with some really excellent questions. I'm impressed.
Do you have to catch the butterflies, or do you have them come?
All right, I didn't quite hear that one.
How do you catch the butterflies?
Jane, she asked, how do you catch the butterflies?
Okay, another really good question. So, a common misconception, and I'm sure, I know I heard this when I was younger, and I think some of you might have too, is if you touch a butterfly, it's going to die because it won't be able to fly. How many people have heard that you can't touch butterflies? Yeah, so quite a few of you. That is actually not true. Obviously, if you touch a butterfly and handle it really roughly, if you, say, break its wings, it won't be able to fly. However, if you are very careful, use a nice, gentle touch, you can touch the butterflies. So in the lab, when we touch butterflies, we always use gloves. Because as we kind of talked about, we try and have a really sterile environment, really clean. No germs, no bacteria. We try really hard to keep those butterflies healthy. So we use gloves. And actually, if I can, let me get my screen back here so I'm with you guys. Can you see me?
Yeah.
Waving at you? All right. So I actually have a butterfly here. So as you saw, these are the butterflies that we keep in the sleeping bags. So I will show you an example of how we hold these butterflies. And I'm not using gloves, which is kind of a no-no, but just for example's sake, I'll show you. So when we take the butterfly out of its sleeping bag, it's important that we hold all four wings together. So what I typically do is I'll take the butterfly, hold it close to the abdomen, and grab all four wings and kind of pinch it like this, so I have control over all of its wings. You can kind of see its legs moving, abdomen moving, but not the wings, so it's not going anywhere. And if you use a gentle touch, you can handle these butterflies. You know, they may weigh less than a paperclip, but they fly over 3,000 miles to Mexico. So they have to be pretty tough, right?
Yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions you guys have about the Monarch Lab, what we do, about butterflies in general?
Hunter?
How long is this going to take?
How long does one take
Yeah.
to migrate down to Mexico?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So typically we're going to start seeing monarchs leave to travel south around the beginning of September. Most of the monarchs will make it down to Mexico by about Thanksgiving or the beginning of December. So roughly it takes them about 2.5 to 3 months to make it down to Mexico. But it all varies and depends on how the wind flows, how the weather is, what the temperature is like. So it's pretty amazing. You guys can probably imagine if a monarch is going to fly 3,000 miles and it weighs less than a paperclip, it won't be able to flap its small wings the whole way there. So how do you guys think monarchs are able to travel down to Mexico using as little energy as possible? How about in the pink shirt at the yellow table?
By drinking lots of flowers.
Okay, yep. So that's a really great point. So those migrating monarchs, they have a lot of energy stored up during their migration. And how they get that energy is they nectar from native flowers. And it's important to have those chains of native habitat all the way down to Mexico. So from Minnesota to Mexico, down that straight corridor, it's important to have chains of quality habitat. Because if there's only habitat in Minnesota and then some habitat in Mexico, but there's no habitat in, say, Nebraska, Oklahoma, that's usable for the monarchs, that's a problem because they do need that energy. They need those consistent nectar plants. Monarchs are also able to fly all the way down to Mexico because they cheat a little bit. They use the wind. So monarchs are actually able to fly really, really high up in the air, and they get into these jet streams that are flowing south. Once in these jet streams, the monarchs kind of use the wind and act almost as a glider. So they're only flapping their wings basically very minimally to kind of stay oriented south. Otherwise, they're up in those jet streams, really high in the air. Air Force fighter pilots have actually reported seeing monarch butterflies from their fighter jets. Isn't that amazing? Those fighter jets are way above the clouds. They've seen monarch butterflies up there. Pretty amazing. Other questions?
Caitlin? Oh, you were stretching. Okay. Brayden?
How fast do monarch butterflies fly?
That's another really good question. So I'm not sure on exact speeds per se. I can tell you that a monarch has flown, there's a very interesting program that you might have heard of called Monarch Watch, which is a citizen science program that tags monarch butterflies that are migrating to Mexico. So they stick a small tag on the wing of these monarchs. Once the tag is recovered, you can see how far the monarch flew. They record where the monarch was tagged and where it was recovered. So just this past year, in 2014, a monarch going down to Mexico was recovered. And that monarch flew over 730 miles in only 3 days. So that's a lot of ground. They're really covering a lot of ground there. I'm not sure how fast they were flying, but I think one of the main things that helps them really cover that amount of mileage in just 3 days is being up in those Gulf streams. Those wind streams really act as a friend to the monarch and push them south quicker than they could fly. If you're interested in kind of seeing how far the monarchs have flown and maybe calculating how fast they might have had to go to cover that distance, if you go on to monarchwatch.com, monarchwatch.org, you'll be able to look up some of those tagged monarchs. You'll actually be able to see how far they flew and from where and where they were recovered. So you can kind of calculate how fast they might have had to go to fly that far in only 3 days. There's some other questions.
Okay, Peter?
Do butterflies and caterpillars go to the bathroom?
Do butterflies and caterpillars go to the bathroom? Yes, great question. So, they do. Yes, the answer is yes. And they actually have they have a special name for caterpillar poop. Anybody know what caterpillar poop is called? Oh, I think someone might have said it, frass. So caterpillar, and actually most insect poop is called frass. And so adult monarch butterflies actually go to the bathroom too. Their excretion is more of in a liquid form rather than a solid form. And as we kind of discussed earlier and touched on, even in that chrysalis stage, the monarch is excreting a waste product, which is what you see when the monarch ecloses out of the chrysalis. That's what falls to the ground. Any other questions out there that I can address?
Who is it to ask it? Brady?
How are we doing on time?
We're fine. We can do a few more minutes. Sure.
Okay, a few more minutes, sure.
We have one little guy here. Go ahead, Brady, asking your question.
Did you actually know that sometimes actually caterpillars will munch on raspberry plants? I've seen them.
Could you repeat that one more time? I didn't quite catch it.
He said that he's seen butterflies munch on raspberry plants.
I mean
Caterpillars.
Okay, yeah. Okay, nice. Good observation. So I'm not sure what species of caterpillar uses strawberry as a host plant. You probably didn't see monarchs because monarchs will only use milkweed as a host plant. But you should definitely, it'd be interesting to look that up on the internet and maybe find out what caterpillar you might have seen. So if you Google, say, caterpillar on raspberry host plant, Google might be able to give you some answers on what species you just saw. Good observation. Yeah, you can see that caterpillars and a lot of different organisms, they use a lot of different plants to complete their life cycle, which kind of ties back into why planting a lot of native plants native to your region is important, because that's what supports all those different organisms and their different needs. Good observation. Anybody else have some questions on the lab or butterflies?
Do butterflies, how many butterflies are there in Minnesota?
All right, so I heard how many butterflies are there? Is that the whole question?
No, in Minnesota.
Oh, in Minnesota. Okay, nice. Yeah, so in Minnesota, there are 473, I believe 473 is the correct number, of different species native to Minnesota. And compared to moths, there are about 2,000 plus moths that are native to Minnesota. So the number of moths greatly outnumber the number of butterflies here. And I'm guessing it's about the same for Wisconsin, since we're closely related in our ecosystems. See another question up front here.
Do butterflies just live in the United States or in other countries too?
All right, so I didn't quite catch that question.
He asked do butterflies live just in the United States or do they live in other countries too?
Oh, great question. Yeah, so butterflies, butterflies are pretty much across the world except in Antarctica. You'll find species of butterfly in most other continents. Actually, so if we're talking a little bit about monarch butterflies have a lot of different closely related relatives. So their closest related relative lives in South America. So South America actually has a species of monarch butterfly too. And there are also species of monarchs in the Iberian Peninsula, which is kind of in the Mediterranean around Italy and Portugal and Spain. So they are monarch butterflies in Europe. And actually, kind of a cool fact, during the migration season, sometimes there are reports of butterflies ending up on the coast of the UK. That means some monarchs actually somehow either make it across the Pacific Ocean, the entire Pacific Ocean, or the coast of England, or they end up kind of moving northwards from Portugal. There are a lot of different species of butterflies in Africa, and there are many, many, perhaps the most in the world, different butterfly species in the rainforests in southeastern Asia. Rainforests in South America and southeastern Asia, they are really rich in their biodiversity, or the amount of different organisms that those ecosystems can support. So to answer your question, yes, there are thousands and thousands of species of butterflies all across the different continents besides Antarctica. And I'm sure that there are some that have yet to be discovered, especially in those rainforest regions where the amount of species that are there are quite astounding. So that's why we need future scientists, like I was saying, just like you guys, to engage in those important discoveries. That there's a lot about butterflies, and actually there's a lot about monarch butterflies that we still don't know. It's still a mystery. For example, why do they go to the exact same spots, the exact same mountains, the exact same trees even in Mexico as their great-great-grandparents, which they never meet? This is still a mystery. So there's a lot out there that you guys are able to discover as future scientists. All right, do we have some more questions?
I think we said we'll just keep the 3 more that were up here because we're probably running late on time. Abby?
Yeah, 3 more sounds good.
How long do you keep the butterflies in the sleeping bag?
That's a really good question. Yeah, a lot of people like to ask about the sleeping bags because it's kind of weird. So the butterflies we keep in the sleeping bags typically about 4 to 6 weeks, depending on what their ultimate outcome of their life will be. Because we do a lot of education and community outreach, we keep a lot of butterflies alive so we can bring them to these events like the ones I just showed you. It's always fun to engage with people when you have a real butterfly around. So a lot of times those butterflies will end up being used for presentations. A lot of the butterflies, though, that we keep in those sleeping bags, at the end of 6 weeks, we do go to a special site and we will release them. So we release them back into the population. Of course, we check if they're disease-free, how healthy they are, if they're able to fly. And if they're all good, we will actually release a good handful of those butterflies out into the wild again.
Okay.
All right, another question out there.
How many butterflies do you have in the lab?
Right now, how many adult butterflies do we have in the lab? Okay, I have a number on this. I think we have about 32 adult butterflies currently. And that is actually, that may sound like a big number, but that's actually a really small number here for the Monarch Lab. So as we kind of talked about, the wild butterflies are going to be arriving in our region, the Minnesota, Wisconsin region, hopefully by the end of May. As I look outside right now, it's cold and rainy here, so it doesn't give me really good hope that they'll be here by the end of May, but hopefully we'll be seeing them by the beginning of June. And once that happens, that's when the research season in the Monarch Lab really ramps up. And we can have about 200 plus butterflies in that incubator at one time. As you can imagine, feeding those butterflies, it's quite a challenge. Oh shoot, I really wish I had included a picture of how we feed these butterflies, because it's pretty comical, kind of entertaining. So have you guys seen animals drink out of a trough before? Pigs and cows like that?
No. Yeah.
Oh, well, a lot of farm animals, they eat from troughs. And so that's so you can feed a lot of animals at one time. And that's actually how we feed our monarch butterflies. We have a trough, a monarch butterfly trough, that's filled with honey water. So the monarchs in captivity, they drink honey water, which is an equivalent to the nectar that they would receive in the wild. And so we actually take these monarch butterflies and we pin them down using wing weights. So we put weights on their wings so they can't fly away. And we'll line up butterflies right next to each other, next to a trough filled with honey water. Then we take their proboscis, or their tongue, which is how they nectar, and we take it with a probe. We take a probe and we extend the proboscis out into that honey water. And so the butterflies then are able to eat from a trough, and we can feed up to 50 at a time that way. It's kind of funky. If you go on the Monarch Lab Facebook page, we have a Facebook and a website that I encourage you all to visit. There's a lot of great information on there. But if you go on our Facebook page, you'll be able to see a picture of that trough and how those monarchs feed. It's pretty funny. So I think we had one more question we were going to get to, right?
Yep, one more. Candace?
When you have a butterfly that has a disease, what do you do with it?
All right, so when we have a butterfly that hatches, what do we do with it? Was that your question?
When you have a butterfly that has a disease, what do you do with it?
Oh, if you guys have a butterfly that has a disease, what should you do with it? Well, this is kind of hard to hear for most people, but if you do have a diseased butterfly, the best thing to do is to humanely kill it. So to do that, essentially you will put that butterfly in a plastic bag and then stick it in the freezer. Sticking a butterfly in the freezer is a humane way to end its life. It's very painless because that butterfly is cold-blooded. It eventually just slows down its metabolism until it stops. And it's a painless way for the butterfly to go. It's important to keep a healthy, if you have butterflies in your classroom, it is important to keep a healthy population. And and most importantly, you never want to release a diseased butterfly into the wild, because you might not know what the disease is on the butterfly, first of all. And more importantly, you might not know how that disease will affect the wild population that might not have had exposure to the same bacteria or germs as the butterflies you raised in captivity. Great questions, guys. It sounds like you have really learned a lot about the life cycle of the butterfly and invertebrates in general, which is really important because those small insects and things that we don't see actually play a very, very large role in the ecosystems and the world and habitats that we all are a part of. Well, thank you very much for having me in your classroom today. I had a blast with you guys. This was my first virtual field trip I've ever done, and I really hope I can do some more. It was really great sitting here and talking with you and learning with you. You guys taught me a lot with your great questions, and thank you for being so active in participating, and I really hope you enjoyed some of the videos and the pictures that you were able to see of the Monarch Lab.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, and I hope you have a great rest of your school day. If you have more questions, you can go on to our website, monarchlab.org, and we have an Ask the Expert question part to our website. So if you have some more questions, you can submit them on monarchlab.org, and one of our experts will get an answer back to you guys.
Thank you, Dane.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Miss Bruno. It was really my pleasure to be here today.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, guys. Bye-bye. Have a good day.